The road into Firebase Adler was 9 kilometers of switchback gravel that the wind kept trying to take back. And by the time the resupply convoy ground through the wire that afternoon, everything on it wore the same coat of pale grit. The trucks, the crates, the men, and the woman nobody had bothered to log. I was standing under the shade net outside the operations tent when they rolled in, and I remember thinking she looked like part of the cargo. She sat on the tailgate of the second truck with a scarred rucksack between her boots and a plain contractor's cap pulled low, and she came off the vehicle without waiting for anyone to help her down. No unit patch I could read at that distance. No swagger. Just a woman in dust-colored civilian-cut fatigues who stepped clear of the truck, set her ruck against the HESCO wall, and stood looking at the ridgeline the way a person looks at weather. "Who's that?" I said to my first sergeant, Del Ruiz, who had the manifest. Ruiz squinted at the clipboard. "Logistics contractor, property accountability, inventory reconciliation, something like that. Vance. She's transiting. 2 nights, then she flies out on the Thursday bird with the busted generator cores." 2 nights, I said. "Good, I don't want tourists." That was the whole of it. That was how much thought I gave her 6 seconds in a bad joke before I turned back to the report on my desk. I have gone over those 6 seconds more times than I can count since, and I will tell you honestly that there was nothing in them that warned me. She didn't look like anything. That was the point. That was, I would learn, the entire point of her. My name is Ryan Mercer. That season I was a captain, 31 years old, in command of the Joint Security Element at Adler, a remote outpost in the high mountain corridor we called the Saddle, a place of thin air and thinner margins where the border ran through country too broken for anyone to properly hold. I had 42 soldiers, a rotating handful of coalition liaison and contract personnel, 2 mortar tubes, a medical bay the size of a closet, and a line of fighting positions strung along a horseshoe ridge that a smarter army would never have tried to defend with so few. We had been quiet for 3 weeks. Quiet at Adler was a thing you did not trust. Quiet was the sound the mountain made while it decided. I tell you all this so you understand the man I was that afternoon, competent, tired, protective of my men to a fault, and certain, so certain that I could read a person at a glance. I had built my whole young command on that certainty. I thought command was mostly knowing who was who. I thought I knew who she was. She was baggage. She was 2 nights and a Thursday flight. She was, I would find out, the most dangerous person to set foot inside my wire in the 8 months I held it. And by the time I understood that, 3 of my men would already have put hands on her, and I would have stood in my own operations tent and told her it was her fault. The canteen at Adler wasn't much. A Connex box married to plywood extension, some field tables, a coffee urn that ran all day, and a cracked flat screen that got 1 channel of forces broadcasting when the dish felt like cooperating. In the evenings it filled up, men coming off the line, men going onto it, the low, ugly, tender noise of soldiers who are bored and afraid in equal measure and have nowhere else on earth to put either feeling. It was the one warm room in a cold place. It was also, on a bad night, the one place where the pressure that built up in men with nothing to shoot at came looking for somewhere to go. The second night was a bad night. I wasn't there when it started. I have had to assemble what happened from a dozen accounts, and the accounts don't all agree, but the shape of it I am sure of, because the men who told me were ashamed enough by the end to tell the truth. There was a card game. There was the last of a bottle that shouldn't have been on the outpost at all, moved quietly hand to hand the way those things always are. And there were 3 men in the middle of it, Corporal Tanner Blay, and 2 of his fire team, Nash and Odom, who were the kind of soldiers a commander keeps because they are hard and useful and does not look at too closely because he is afraid of what he'll have to do about them. She came in late for coffee. That was all she wanted. She'd been in the Accountability Connex most of the day, and she came into the canteen after most of the tables had turned over, filled a paper cup at the urn, and went to sit in the corner by herself with a paperback, which is exactly what a person does when they want to be left alone in a room full of strangers. Blay didn't leave her alone. I've heard 3 versions of what he said, and they don't matter. They were the small, stupid, testing things a certain kind of man says to a woman he's decided is beneath him and therefore safe. She didn't answer. That was the part I keep coming back to. Every witness agrees on it. She didn't rise to it, didn't sharpen, didn't get up and leave. She turned a page. She said once quietly, "I'm just having my coffee, Corporal," and she went on reading. There was no fear in it and no heat in it. There was something worse than either, from Blay's point of view. There was a complete, level indifference, the calm of a person who has genuinely nothing to prove to anyone in that room. I understand now that it was the calm that set him off. Men like Blay need to be felt. Her not feeling him was the one thing he couldn't stand. He knocked the coffee out of her hand, leaned over the table and swept the cup off it, and the coffee went across her book and her wrist. And when she stood, not fast, they all said, not lunging, just standing up the way you stand up to leave, he shoved her, 2 hands full weight, into the connect's wall. Nash laughed. Odom was up by then too, the 3 of them making the wall of bodies that men make when they've decided to teach somebody a lesson and want it to look like a fair thing that got out of hand. And she let them. I want to be careful here, because this is the hinge of the whole story and I have thought about it for a long time. She let them hit her. Blay put a fist into her ribs and she took it against the wall. Odom grabbed a fistful of her collar. She got a split lip out of it and a bruise across her cheekbone that would go the colors of a bad sunset over the next 2 days. 3 men, armed, hard, laughing, in a plywood room 9 kilometers past the edge of anywhere. And she stood in the middle of them and did not lift a hand. I know why now, I didn't then. She let them because she had done the math the instant it began, the way she'd been trained to do it until it was faster than thought. 3 targets, confined space, a room full of my soldiers who did not know her and had every reason to believe her the aggressor if it came to blows, a cover to protect. A mission she was passing through the middle of that had nothing to do with a corporal's wounded pride. She let them because a woman who could have put all 3 of them on the floor in the time it takes to say it had decided, in a cold half-second, that breaking Blay's arm in my canteen would cost more than a split lip would. She absorbed it. She chose to absorb it. And when Sergeant Ruiz finally came through the door and bellowed the room into stillness, what he found was a bleeding contract worker against the wall, and 3 of my men standing over her with their blood up. And he did the natural thing, the thing I would have done, the thing that shames me to this day. He assumed she'd started it. They brought both parties to me. It was near midnight, and I was short on sleep and long on the particular irritation of a commander who has just been told that his hard, useful men have gotten into something. I stood in the operations tent under the one bright bulb, and I looked at a corporal I needed on the line in 6 hours, and a contractor I'd be rid of by Thursday, and I made the easiest decision available to me, which is the definition of a bad one. Blay talked first, fast and aggrieved, the way guilty men do. She'd been mouthing off, she'd swung on Nash, it had gotten physical, they'd only restrained her. Nash and Odom nodded along, and she stood there with her lip crusting over and her cheeks swelling and said none of it, offered no version, made no complaint, until I finally turned to her and asked her directly what had happened. She looked at me for a moment, level, steady, that same indifference except that when it was pointed at me I read it as insolence. "Ask your men, Captain," she said. "It's their outpost." That was all. She wouldn't defend herself. And to a tired man who wanted the problem gone, a person who won't defend herself looks a great deal like a person who can't. I took it for guilt. I took her silence, which was in fact the most disciplined thing in that tent. And I called it attitude. "I've got a war to run," I told her, "and I don't have time to referee a contractor who can't spend 2 nights on my outpost without starting a brawl in my canteen. You'll stay in the transient billet until the Thursday bird. You'll take your meals off-cycle, and you'll stay away from my soldiers." I turned to Blay. "And you're better than a bar fight. Get some sleep. You're on the line at 600. I dressed him down for form's sake and I let him go to bed. I let all three of them go to bed. And I sent her, bleeding, silent, guilty of nothing but being unreadable, back to a cot in a plywood box with a warning to keep clear of the men who had just put her against a wall. She didn't argue. She said, "Yes, Captain," in a voice with nothing in it, picked up her cap and walked out into the dark. At the flap she stopped, just for a second, and looked back, not at me, at the map board behind me, at the horseshoe of fighting positions and the long exposed draw on the north side that I'd been losing sleep over for a week. She looked at it the way she'd looked at the ridge that first afternoon, reading weather. Then she was gone, and I told myself I'd handled it, and I went to bed in a firebase I believed I understood. I had 8 hours before the mountain decided. I've said Adler was hard to hold, and I want you to see it the way I lived it, because everything that happened next turned on the ground. The outpost sat on a saddle between two higher masses of rock, which is a fine place to put an outpost if you have the men to own the high ground on both sides, and a poor one if you don't. We didn't. What we had was the horseshoe, a line of positions along the near ridge, and below it on the north, a long shallow draw choked with scrub and boulder that ran up toward our wire like a natural ramp. I had wanted a strong one at the mouth of that draw for a month. I didn't have the men to garrison it, so we watched it with a single position, post 4, 2 soldiers and a machine gun, and I lost sleep over it. And every morning that the draw was empty I told myself we'd gotten away with it again. The intelligence, when it came the way it usually did, late, partial, and disbelieved. Coalition signals had been picking up chatter for 2 days. Movement in the village's down corridor, a name we'd been chasing for months, the possibility of a coordinated push before the passes closed for the season. My hire pushed it to me at 2200 the night of the canteen, flagged medium confidence, and I read it standing at the map board and did what tired commanders do with medium confidence warnings on quiet outposts. I raised the guard by 1 position, told Ruiz to keep the mortar crew laced up, and went asleep telling myself the mountain was still deciding. The mountain had decided at dusk, we just didn't know it yet. They came at 2:10. They came, of course, up the draw. I will never forget the sound that started it, because it was the wrong sound. Not the crack of a rifle, but a soft, heavy cough from down in the scrub, and then post 4 simply wasn't answering the net anymore. A rocket had gone into the position dead center. By the time I was on my feet, and into my kit, the whole north face had come alive, muzzle flash stitching up the draw, the tearing sound of massed automatic fire, the ugly whump of RPGs walking along our wire, and the 2 soldiers at post 4 were down, and the mouth of the draw I'd worried over for a month was full of men coming up it fast in the dark. They had done their homework. They hit us where we were thin, at the hour we were slowest, with more men than I'd let myself believe the corridor could put together. Within 4 minutes they had a foothold inside the north wire. Within 6, post 4 was overrun, and post 5 beside it was cut off. 3 of my soldiers pinned in a fighting position with the enemy between them and the rest of the outpost. My line was buckling on the side I'd always known would buckle, and I stood in the operations tent with a radio in each hand trying to build a picture out of screaming and static. And I felt the thing every commander dreads feeling, which is the outpost coming apart faster than I could give orders. And 3 of the soldiers cut off at post 5, pinned behind a wall of sandbags with the enemy pouring past them in the dark, were Corporal Tanner Blay and Nash and Odom. I need you to understand where everyone was in that first terrible quarter hour, because it is the frame for everything the woman did. I was in the operations tent, blind, trying to hold a picture together. Ruiz was running the interior line, pulling men off the quiet south side to plug the north. My mortar crew was up but couldn't fire into the draw without dropping rounds on my own cut-off men. My reserve was 4 soldiers and a medic. My air was 90 minutes out on a good night, and this was not a good night. Weather was down in the passes and the birds were holding. I had a foothold inside my wire. 3 men trapped and about to be killed or taken, a dead position, and a plan that had died in the first 4 minutes. And somewhere in the dark between the transient billet and the fight, moving toward the sound of the guns instead of away from it, was a bleeding logistics contractor named Vance, whom I had confined to quarters 8 hours before. I didn't see the beginning of what she did. Almost no one did. That was the nature of it. What I had in the operations tent was the net, and the net is where I first understood that something had changed on the North Line, though it would be a long time before I understood what. It came in the middle of the worst of it. Ruiz's voice ragged, calling that the North Wire was gone, that he couldn't reach Post 5, that he was going to have to give up the fuel point, and then, cutting across all of it, a voice I didn't know. A woman's voice. Flat, unhurried, so calm against the noise that it stopped me cold with the handset halfway to my mouth. Any station this net. I have eyes on the north draw from the Accountability Connect's roof. I count 9, correction, 12 dismounts inside the wire, moving to cut off the 2 eastern positions. Your trapped element at post 5 is alive. I can see muzzle flash from inside the sandbags. They're still fighting. Recommend you hold your interior line where it is and do not counterattack up the middle. You'll walk your reserve into a crossfire. Give me 2 minutes and I'll open the draw for you from the flank. Vance out. I keyed the handset. This is Adler 6. Vance, you are a contractor. You are confined to quarters. Get off my net and get to a bunker. That is an order. There was a short pause, just long enough that I thought she'd complied. Then, in the same flat voice, with something underneath it now that I would only later learn to recognize as the particular patience of a person deciding how much truth to spend. Captain, in about 90 seconds your 3 trapped soldiers are going to be dead or gone, and your interior line is going to fold, and there is exactly 1 person inside this wire right now who is trained to stop that from happening. With respect, stay off the middle and let me work. And then she was gone from the net, and I stood there in the operations tent with a dead handset in my hand and the fight coming apart around me. And for the first time all night, a cold thought moved through me, underneath the fear, quiet as a hand on the shoulder. Who did I have hit in my canteen? The scrub in that draw was chest-high in places and full of shadow, and it should have been a killing ground for the men coming up it, and instead it became one for them. And the difference was a single person moving through it in the dark who knew exactly what she was doing. I have pieced this part together from the men who lived it, and from what I saw myself in the last of it, and from the flat account she gave later that told me almost nothing and everything at once. She had gone up onto the roof of the Accountability Connects first, the highest flat surface on the outpost's north side, not to fight from it, but to read the fight, to build the picture none of us in the operations tent could build. 90 seconds on that roof, and she knew what I hadn't figured out in 6 minutes of screaming radio, where the enemy's weight was, where their gap was, and that the whole assault had a seam in it. The dozen men who'd pushed inside our wire had gotten ahead of their own support, strung out along the draw with their backs to the scrub, focused entirely on the trapped men at post 5. She came off the roof and into that scrub alone. She'd taken a rifle, post 4's spare, from the ready rack by the transient billet, along with a chest rig she'd rigged in the dark by feel. 1 rifle, and she went down the outside of our own wire in the black into the gap between the enemy and their support. And she started at the bottom of the draw and worked up. The men she was hunting never understood what was happening to them. That was the thing every survivor's account had in common. The enemy at the mouth of the draw simply began to come apart from behind, in the dark, quietly, 1 and then another and then 2 more. And by the time the ones higher up realized the pressure had reversed, that something was in the scrub below them taking them from the flank, the panic did half her work for her. She moved the way water moves downhill, finding the line of least resistance, never where the guns were pointed, always at the shoulder and the back of their formation. She fired in short controlled pairs, close, certain, never a wasted burst, and she moved between every engagement so that the muzzle flash was never twice in the same place, and the men trying to find her were always shooting at where she'd just been. 12 had come inside the wire. I don't know the exact count she accounted for, and she never offered one. She was not a person who kept a tally out loud. I know that within 11 minutes of her coming off that roof, the assault up the north draw had lost its cohesion completely, that the men who'd been pouring through the gap were now trying to get back out of it, and that the pressure on Post 5 had broken. And Post 5 was where she went next, toward the 3 men who'd put her against a wall. Blay told me the rest of it himself, days later, in a voice I'd never heard him use. He said the 3 of them had been down to their last magazines behind the sandbags, that Odom was hit in the leg, and Nash's rifle had jammed, and they'd each in his own private heart made his peace with the thing that was 30 seconds away from happening to them. He said the fire from the draw had gotten so heavy they'd stopped shooting back and just gotten low, waiting for the end. And he said that in the middle of that, a voice they knew came out of the dark on the far side of the sandbags, low level, no fear in it at all, and told them to stay down and stay put and hold their fire to the left, that friendlies were moving on the right, and that they were going to be fine. He said it took him a moment to place the voice, and when he did, when he realized that the calm thing in the dark that had just crossed 40 meters of open, contested ground to reach them, that was reorganizing their dying position with 3 flat sentences, that was even now putting itself between them and the guns, was the woman he'd shoved into a wall 8 hours before. He said something in him simply broke and remade itself in the space of that recognition. She got to them. She pulled Odom's belt tight above the wound with her own hands in the dark and told Nash to clear his weapon and get back in the fight, and she put the 3 of them into a tight defensive not facing the right way, and then she took the left flank herself, the open side, the dangerous side, and she held it. She held the seam between Post 5 and the rest of the outpost, alone on the bad corner, and she held it long enough for Ruiz to get organized on my order and push a real counterattack up the middle now that the crossfire she'd warned me about was gone. By the time I got forward, and I did get forward in the last of it with the reserve, because I could not sit in that tent another minute, the north line was ours again. The draw was emptying, the enemy falling back down it in the dark faster than they'd come up, and the sky far out over the passes had finally begun to mutter with the sound of the birds coming in now that the weather had lifted just enough to let them. I came up on Post 5 with my rifle in my hands and my heart going like a hammer, and what I found there stopped me the way her voice on the net had stopped me. 3 of my soldiers, alive, Blay white-faced and steady, Nash reloading, Odom down but breathing, tourniquet tight and holding, and crouched on the exposed left corner of the position with a battered rifle across her knee and the muzzle still tracking the draw, calm as a woman waiting for a bus, was the contractor I'd confined to quarters. Blood on her from the canteen and dust on her from the fight and not one wasted motion anywhere in her. She wasn't out of breath. That's the detail my mind snagged on. She just cleared a draw full of armed men and reorganized a dying position and held the worst corner of it alone, and she wasn't out of breath. She looked up at me, same level eyes I'd read as insolence in my tent. Post 5 stable, Captain, she said like she was reading me an inventory. You've got maybe 6 or 8 of them still moving down the low end of the draw. Your birds are inbound. I'd hold your line where it is and let the aircraft finish it. Don't chase them down there in the dark. That's exactly what they'll want. A pause. Your man needs a real case vac, not the medic's closet. That's the priority now. I couldn't speak for a second. Then I said the only thing there was to say, which was, "Who are you?" She held my eyes for a moment, and she went back to watching the draw, and she said, "I'm the contractor who couldn't spend 2 nights on your outpost without starting a brawl, Captain." She didn't say it with heat. She didn't say it to wound me, though it went in like a blade and I deserved every inch of it. She said it flat, and then she was up and moving to Odom to check the tourniquet, already past it, already on to the next necessary thing, and I stood there in the reddening dark understanding for the first time, all the way down, exactly what I had done 8 hours before. The birds came in 20 minutes later and finished what was left in the draw and took Odom out on a litter. By first light, Adler was ours, quiet, holding 40 of my 42 alive, when it should have been far fewer, when by every honest reckoning of that night it should have been a great many fewer. The two we lost were the two at post 4, who never had a chance, and I grieve them still. But the rest of us were alive to grieve them at all because of one person, and by full daylight every soldier on that outpost knew it, and the knowing moved through the wire like weather. I didn't get the truth of her from her. She'd have flown out Thursday and left me guessing. I got it because when I finally sent the after-action up the chain that morning, forced by honesty, to write that a transiting logistics contractor named Vance had done the thing that saved my outpost, the answer that came back down the chain was not the answer I expected. It came mid-morning, over secure, and it did not come from my higher. It came from a SOCOM liaison officer 3 echelons up, a full commander, whose voice on the encrypted line had a careful quality to it, the quality of a man choosing his words around something he isn't fully cleared to say to me. Captain Mercer, your report references a Vance, first initial N, listed as contract accountability personnel, moving through your location. That's correct, sir. A pause on the line. Captain, I need to correct your accountability record, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you does not go into any further report and is not discussed on your outpost beyond what's operationally necessary. Are we clear? I said we were clear. I remember my mouth had gone dry. The individual on your outpost is Chief Petty Officer Nora Vance, United States Navy. She is an active operator with Naval Special Warfare, direct action qualified, one of a very small number of women in the community operating in that role. Call sign Sable. The logistics cover on your manifest is exactly that, a cover for a task that is not yours to know. She was moving through your corridor in transit, and she was not, under any circumstances, supposed to have to break that cover. The commander's voice tightened, and for the first time it carried something that wasn't procedure. Captain, I've read your after-action. I want to be certain I understand it. Is it accurate that a Navy SEAL passed through your fire base, and that at some point in that transit, 3 of your soldiers physically assaulted her in your canteen, and that you confined her to quarters over it? The operations tent was full. Ruiz was there, and 2 of my platoon leaders, and a signal sergeant, and they had all gone very still, and the only sound was the fan and the hiss of the open channel. That's accurate, sir, I said. The fault for that is mine. I misjudged the situation and I misjudged her. There was a silence on the line that I will hear for the rest of my life. Then the commander said, quietly, she let 3 armed men beat her rather than break her cover or hurt your people. Do you understand what that discipline costs, Captain? Do you understand what she chose to absorb in your canteen, so that a mission you'll never hear about wouldn't be compromised by a corporal's temper? A breath. And then she cleared your draw. All right. Get her on the Thursday bird as scheduled. Treat her as the contractor your manifest says she is in front of your people. And Captain, the smallest pause, the next time a quiet person you can't read walks through your wire and won't defend themselves, you might ask yourself why a person like that would have nothing to prove to you. Liaison out. The channel closed. I have stood in a lot of quiet rooms. I have never stood in a quiet like the one in that operations tent when the channel closed. Nobody moved. Ruiz was staring at the map board with his jaw working and nothing coming out. The signals sergeant had gone the color of the plywood. And every man in that tent was doing the same arithmetic I was doing, the arithmetic that started in the canteen 2 nights before and ran through a shoved coffee cup and a fist in the ribs, and a woman put against a wall and confined to quarters by her commander, and ended here, at a SEAL at Sable, at the operator who had crossed 40 meters of fire to save the 3 men who'd struck her, and had never once before or after said a single word to make us feel it. The silence in that tent was the forced respect. It was the whole niche of my life for one moment. The doubt turned over complete, in front of everyone, and no salute could have said it louder than that room full of hard men unable to look at each other. I found her on the flight line that afternoon. She was sitting on her scarred ruck beside the pallet of dead generator cores, in the same dust-colored fatigues, the same contractor's cap, the bruise on her cheekbone gone the colors I'd known it would. The Thursday bird was 15 minutes out. She was reading the same paperback. She looked again, exactly like part of the cargo, and I understood now that this was a thing she did on purpose, a skill as deep as any of the others. The ability to be nobody, to be baggage, to be 2 nights and a Thursday flight, in a world that would have made her a target the moment it knew what she was. I didn't know how to start, so I started with the truth. "Chief Vance." She looked up. Something flickered at the rank she registered that I knew, and then it was gone and she was level again. "Captain." "I put you against no defense in my tent," I said. "I took your silence for guilt. I confined you to quarters while the men who assaulted you slept, and I sent you back to a cot with a warning to stay clear of them. And then you went into that draw for those same men, and you held the worst corner of it alone, and you never said one word to make me know what I'd done." My voice wasn't steady, and I let it not be steady. "I don't have a way to make that right. I'm not going to insult you by trying. I just wanted to stand in front of you and say it plainly, with my own mouth, before you fly out. I was wrong about you in every way a man can be wrong, and 40 of my soldiers are alive because you were exactly what I couldn't see." She was quiet for a moment. Out over the passes, the sound of the inbound bird was growing. "Can I tell you something, Captain?" she said. "Not as a correction, just so you carry the right lesson and not the wrong one." "Please." "I didn't go into that draw for those 3 men." She closed the paperback over her thumb. "I'd have gone for any of them. I'd have gone for you. What Blade did in that canteen, that was a small man having a small night, and I've met 100 of him, and I stopped taking it personally a long time ago. It's not worth carrying." She looked at me, and for the first time there was something almost gentle in the level of her gaze, the patience of someone who has decided to spend a little truth on a man who might use it. "You want to make it right. You don't do it by feeling bad about me. I'll be gone in 10 minutes and you'll never see me again. You make it right by being the kind of commander who doesn't need to know what's under the cap, who protects the quiet contractor he can't read the same as the man he can. Because the day you can only tell who's worth defending after you find out what they are." She stood and shouldered the scarred ruck and settled the cap. "That's the day you've already lost the ones who needed you most. Most of them never get a draw to clear. They just get the wall, and nobody ever finds out who they were." The bird came in then, throwing grit across the whole flight line, and she picked up her ruck and walked toward it. Not fast, not slow, no swagger, no backward glance. A woman in dust-colored fatigues who looked like part of the cargo. She climbed aboard with the dead generator cores, and the ramp came up, and the aircraft lifted into the thin, bright air over the saddle and banked south and was gone. I never saw Chief Petty Officer Nora Vance again. Sable. I don't know what she flew out to do, or where, or whether she's still doing it, and I've made my peace with not knowing. That not knowing is the whole shape of what she was. But I want to tell you what I did with what she gave me, because a lesson you don't use is just a wound you keep open. I held Adler another 5 months, and then 2 more outposts after it in 2 more hard places, and I made rank, and men were placed under me who I was responsible for reading and knowing and deciding about, hundreds of them over the years. And in all that time, I never again looked at a quiet person I couldn't read and decided they were nothing. I built my command on a different certainty than the one I'd carried up that switchback road. Not that I could tell at a glance who was who, but that I never could, not really, and that the not knowing was exactly why the standard had to hold for everyone, the loud and the quiet, the ones with patches and the ones who looked like cargo. I dressed down more than one hard, useful soldier over the years for putting hands on someone smaller, and every time, every single time. I thought of a plywood canteen and a shoved cup of coffee, and a woman who could have broken 3 men and chose instead to take the wall. Blay I kept. People ask me sometimes why. I kept him because the thing that broke in him behind those sandbags remade itself into a better man, and I watched it happen over 5 months. And a commander who throws away the ones who learn is no better than one who protects the ones who don't. He never spoke her name after that night, but I saw him, more than once, be the one who crossed a room to stand beside the quiet soldier the others had decided was nothing. He'd learned it in the worst possible way. He'd learned it. That was hers too. They hit the wrong woman in my canteen. That's the thing people say when they hear the story, and they say it like the point is that she turned out to be a SEAL, like the lesson is careful who you shove. They might be dangerous. But that was never the lesson. I stood on that flight line and heard the real one from her own mouth, and I've carried it 30 years. There is no wrong woman. There was only ever a captain who thought some people were safe to fail, and a mountain that taught him otherwise, and a quiet operator in a dust-colored cap who crossed 40 meters of fire to save the men who never once deserved it, and who climbed onto a Thursday flight and vanished into the thin, bright air without waiting for a single one of us to say thank you. I never got to, so I'll say it here where maybe the saying of it does some good. Thank you, Sable. I see you now. I should have seen you in the canteen. I spent the rest of my career making sure I'd never need a draw to clear before I did.